They said it would be axed. They said it was edgy bait. They said it was an industry plant. But after 49 chapters and 366 days, I think it's safe to say enough time has passed. The Kagurabachi experience this past year has been an interesting one I'd like to talk about at length. How has the manga changed since its first chapter? What sort of community has this manga created? And in a general sense, what has Kagurabachi's freshman year looked like? As a Kagurabachi community member and someone who has been following this manga rather closely from the beginning, how this series has transformed both in its narrative and its visuals has been a delight to witness. During the earliest stages of its hype, whether it be from the art found in the manga itself or the inexplicable memes surrounding it before it even debuted, I would certainly say that I was skeptical of this manga being disappointing, based both on my own standards as an enjoyer of the medium and someone who had seen plenty of good, or at least interesting stories come and go as a result of them not gaining enough popularity to survive the Shonen Jump axe. Kagurabachi's first chapter certainly didn't wow me in a way that no manga has before, but since I was already reading it, and it was a series with engaging combat from a visual standpoint, I did have my mind open to being changed, and if you couldn't tell already, change it certainly did. Now, my experience with Kagurabachi in this sense isn't all that unique, and in fact, it's probably the origin story of most fans of this manga. While we were initially just provided what seemed to be shallow coolness, chapter after chapter after chapter, Hokuzono was expanding on his characters, world, and fights, and slowly but surely, I was being won over as the weeks continued. The first major turning point for me, alongside my Bachi brethren, was the introduction of SoJo and his first fight with Chihiro. At this point, it's basically a canon event that new readers of the story get to chapter 8, see these two enchanted blade wielders square off, and almost immediately take the story much more seriously than they had before. While the prior 7 chapters had ranged from okay to even good, this was the first moment in the manga where I actually felt a spark of interest. I really wanted to see how this fight would go down, and Hokuzono certainly didn't disappoint in the following chapters. From this point on, it was very obvious that Kagurabachi was picking up steam and that Hokuzono himself was getting much more comfortable and competent before our very eyes. After chapter 8, the next moment that I think really moved me was the 14th chapter of the series, and this ratcheted up my excitement to a whole new level. This small 2-panel sequence lives in the heads of every Kagurabachi fan rent-free. Hell, we're paying for Hokuzono to keep it there. And ending the chapter with Chihiro expanding his understanding and connection to Enten in order to develop an entirely new iteration of a move was the perfect cliffhanger. Things really started snowballing soon after this, as chapters 15, 16, 17, and 18 are to this day some of the best content we've gotten from Kagurabachi, and the rest almost feels like history. I've talked more in depth about Chihiro as a protagonist, the story of Kagurabachi qualitatively, and specifically SoJo as the first major villain of the story at length, so I'll do my best to restrain myself here. But needless to say, Hokuzono really put his foot down and set the tone of what was to come. The Versus SoJo arc was an amazing one, an introduction to the world of Kagurabachi that most people reading its first chapter couldn't have dreamed of getting. In fact, it's an arc so well executed from start to finish, it almost made you wonder, could Hokuzono do this again? Like, was this something that he had in his bag, or was this 18 chapters of greatness a spark of brilliance that would take quite a while to replicate? The following arc doused the flames of doubt in ice-cold water. The Rakuzaichi is possibly the best thing that Hokuzono could have followed up with, and many of the weaknesses or aspects of Kagurabachi that I found to be a work in progress, like the greater world at large and the sidecast, was vastly improved seamlessly. With a greater implementation of the Kaminabe into the plot, Hiyuki and Hakuri being newly introduced characters that have become fan favorites, and the confidence of each technical aspect of the manga growing stronger, it's not wild to say that Hokuzono followed his first masterclass with another, potentially even greater one. The work that was done with the Sazanami family specifically is some of the best character work that can be found in Kagurabachi. From Akuri's development to Kyora's obsession with the auction, everything was able to be tied together in a bittersweet and cohesive bow, as the curtain fell both on this part of the story and the Rakuzaichi as a saga more broadly. One of these days I'll make a video specifically dedicated to Hikuri, but it's no small feat to create a side character with the lovability of someone like Char, while also fast-tracking his development enough to allow for pages like this to hit and hit hard. As a friend of Chihiro, a combatant against sorcerers, and what we Kagurabachi fans figure to be the deuteragonist of the manga, Hikuri goes well above and beyond the call of duty. He is, by all means, an amazing addition to the story, and possibly the second best character in the entire manga. To a lesser extent, the same thing could be said about Hiyuki in her introduction. During the Rakuzaichi arc, her characterization is a bit more limited than Hikuri's due to having a smaller pool of screen time to pull from, but what she lacks in panels on the page, she more than makes up for with a dominant on-screen presence. In both design and personality, Hiyuki demands that attention be drawn towards herself, and me personally, I'm never gonna be mad at that. Her dutiful nature seems to clash quite heavily with her fiery personality, especially when Chihiro is involved in any given scenario. Her connection and loyalty to the Kaminabe is often placed in straining positions, and it is in those times of stress that we see Hiyuki has a deep desire to help people that runs parallel to her fierceness. It's honestly impressive how much we're able to glean from her character, given the fact that we aren't in her head all that much in the first 49 chapters of the manga, and the fact that even now, she hasn't stepped up as a primary protagonist in any given moment throughout the story. Her strength as the Kaminabe's greatest fighter is very cool. Flamebone itself is also a very curious weapon on basically all fronts, as it's impossible to discern exactly what it is, how and why Hiyuki has it, and for what reason its full power is capable of clashing with an enchanted blade. All of these mysteries almost guarantee that there is more to come for her character, and I myself could not be more excited for that. She shares a similar aura to Chihiro in the sense that whenever she's on screen, it feels like Hokuzono is contractually obligated to do the coolest shit ever. And honestly, whoever made him sign that contract, I hope you're having an amazing day right now. Speaking of aura, you got the main man himself, the protagonist of Kagurabachi, Chihiro Rokuhira, who has seen so much change throughout this story, both in terms of in-world development and perception from the community at large. As time goes on and you continue to see him put himself into dangerous situation after dangerous situation, the genjutsu both he and Hokuzono had you under starts to lift. Simply put, Chihiro, I know what you are, gang. I see through your facade. That edgelord, I keep this scar so I can wake up with fresh hate shtick, it don't work no more. I can see now more clearly than ever that this is one of the most compassionate and kindest people in the entire world of Kagurabachi, and he wants nothing more than to preserve his father's legacy, make sure the enchanted blades don't harm innocents, and keep his friends safe along the way. The very grim dark persona that Hokuzono basically lathered him in isn't exactly a lie, but it certainly wasn't the whole truth. No, I'm not gonna baby Chihiro and say he's just a little guy or anything, cause he isn't. He still wants revenge, and this is a grown man who, for the sake of his goals and ideals, can be a calculated and cold-blooded killer at the drop of a hat. We've seen it time and time again. It's just that his body count and his rather aloof and cold exterior betrays the three-dimensionality of his character, and that's intentional. While I'd argue and have argued in other videos that it adds to the depth of his character to show such kindness and empathy while still seeming so cold on the surface, the fact of the matter is that Chihiro has always been this. There never really was a time, we've seen at least, where he wasn't, and Hokuzono being able to set us up for realizing this, sometimes in tandem with the characters of the story themselves, is quite the narrative feat. Simultaneously, he goes on to have Chihiro develop most strikingly his territorial outlook on what his father and his greatest works mean, being challenged and broken down by SoJo. Coming to realize that he is not the sole owner of Kunishige's impact, influence, and memories, yet still deciding to fight for that version of him, shows a level of maturity and empathy once more that is just so amazing to see. In the Rakuzaichi, Chihiro is able to further decouple his own value and worth from his father's directly, all while deepening his connection with him and the blades that he created. The necessity of giving up Enten temporarily allowed Chihiro to discover a new use for it, and later in the arc, he even shows us the bond he and Cloud Gouger were able to obtain in a short time wielding it, which is something he never would have resorted to if he wasn't forced to adapt and actually relinquish Enten from its grasp. In the Swordbearer assassination arc that is still in its very early stages, I'm sure Chihiro will take another major step forward as a character, and I am just giddy at the thought of reading a chapter of Kagurabachi each week and dissecting it. Now, Kagurabachi's visual progression is something that I've already kind of been showing you guys in the background by way of illustrating my point with manga panels and whatnot, but I think it's appropriate to at least call to attention how much the manga's look has changed in a short year. Now, the fights themselves have honestly remained pretty similar. They've improved. Hokuzono's definitely refined his artistry in that regard, but a lot of the energy and vibe of them remains the same, in part because fights in Kagurabachi already had a very cinematic nature to them, but also because many of Kagurabachi's art style changes focus on character design and expression more than explicit changes in detail and level of composition. Battles in Kagurabachi are as good as they are because of the concepts, framing, and paneling more so than the choreography, which is more subject to change as an artist's style does. When comparing Chihiro's facial expressions in chapter 1 to them in chapter 49, however, you can tell that Hokuzono has really changed his pen game. I know the big bug eyes and what the community has called yaoi chin isn't exactly everybody's cup of tea, but I really like it. Don't get me wrong, sometimes it can get a little extreme. Like, damn, Chihiro really keep two enchanted blades on him. One is Enten and the other is that sharp ass chin. But for the most part, I think these exaggerated features do well to convey the emotion that is so often front and center in this manga. There certainly is a level of detail that is lost in these illustrations, sure, but I myself don't view that as the end all be all. A lot of this edge and detail can be chalked up to being lost as a result of the weekly schedule being demanding, but whether or not it was a purely pragmatic decision or an artistic one, I'm not mad at the direction the visuals have gone in this manga. The evolution we've seen in Kagurabachi in a short 49 chapters is startling, and I can only imagine what this series will look like in another year. What I can estimate with much more accuracy though is what the color palette will look like in 1 year, 2 years, hell, 10 years if Hokuzono decides to go that long, and that's simple: red, black, and white. In this regard, Hokuzono, you are truly the funniest guy I've ever seen, because like, I'm sure he knows other colors exist, right? Like, he just has to. And for all of my joking about the subject, there isn't much in the way of exaggeration there. Like, he just loves going with that color scheme, and I'm not mad at him. It goes hard as hell. Red and black is a crazy color scheme. It just hits. It's just funny how prevalent it is in his work. I will admit though, his colored illustrations do get kinda repetitive, and that's only because I'm tired of getting 10 out of 10 amazing art every time. At this point, I'm waiting for a curveball where we get some real basic and sauceless art from him, just to switch things up, you know? I mean, banger after banger after banger after banger gets a little tiring. Like, we get it, you're good at art, man. Pull a rabbit out of a hat or something. Just show me something a little different. In any case, I'm grateful to Hokuzono for making Kagurabachi a manga that's both so easy to look at and read. In general, he makes it very, very pleasant to be a fan of his work. And in fact, it being so easy to be a fan of this manga touches on something that I also wanted to discuss in this video, being the community of Kagurabachi at large. And honestly, I think this is the first time I can say I'm proud of a manga community and proud to be a part of it. Not only does it seem to be very accepting of all fans, new or old, but it's also just a pretty funny fan base to watch exist in the wild on its own. Now, I don't have any delusions that this super tight-knit feel will last once it absolutely explodes onto the mainstream, but I am still happy that for the time being, fans of this story are so pleasant to interact with generally. I think this pleasantness stems from two places specifically: gratefulness that the manga has succeeded in the way that it has, and Kagurabachi Brazil, who is essentially the messiah for Kagurabachi fans. To explain the first part a little more, very early adopters and fans of the manga were worried that the series would get axed, which was honestly a very real possibility at the time, and almost as a defense mechanism, needed to be inviting and warm so that there was no barrier to entry to being welcomed into the fold. This foundation of desire to keep their manga alive has shown itself in the pretty nice community to be around. This piece has only been maintained to the degree that it has though, due to Kagurabachi Brazil. Brazil, a fan account of the manga on Twitter, and someone who is somehow always there when it pertains to the manga. He's so ubiquitous within the community, in fact, that when it was possible that he was going to be banned, the Kagurabachi community collectively came together and mourned the account. If I had to explain what it feels like to see Kagurabachi Brazil in a word, I honestly wouldn't use one. This Superman image right here does all the talking for me. And if that's a little too niche for you, actually, if Superman is too niche of a reference for you, let me know if they got other rocks in the neighborhood. I'm looking for a new place. But if it somehow is, I guess you could just look at some biblical paintings for reference too. But regardless, this guy is everywhere advocating for the manga, thanking people who've read it, encouraging and being nice to those even if they don't like it, and scolding fans that fall into the adversarial tendencies of the fandoms online. I myself have likened my Kagurabachi discussions to sermons, and while I'd like to say it's a bit, a joke, a goof, a gag, I've actually already received my Kagura christening and have a bachelor's in Hokuzononomics. I'm aiming for the PhD, but for the time being, that's all I can get. Needless to say, I'm real dedicated to the craft and recruiting new members every day, but I digress. To have such a strong, but mostly positive online presence is a real feat, and it's one I'm happy that a manga I enjoy so thoroughly is able to foster. The in-jokes, arcs that the fan base has gone through, and dedication to having more and more people get put onto the series every day almost feels like the Kagurabachi fan base is one big group chat. Even if the manga was only a fraction of what it is today, I'd probably still recommend people read it just to understand what we'll be talking about and having a sense of community that honestly on Twitter in 2024 is kind of hard to find. Now, no one can tell how long this will last or if in the next year I'll be able to say the same thing about the community, but for now, I am very proud of it. And proud of Kagurabachi as a whole. This past year of reading and talking about the series has been a really special one, and I'm so excited to see what's to come for this manga in the future. If you're a fan of the series or would like to be convinced further to become one, check out these videos and subscribe for more like it on the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.